Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Hey kids, welcome to Grumpy Nostalgia, the Second Look Cinema podcast, the show where we go back to the blockbuster new release wall of our memory, grab a copy off the shelf, pop it in the old VCR, and see what time has done to it. I'm Justin, that's Mike.
Hello, Mosh Pit and Headbang.
Nice. And together, we're here to help you navigate all the landmines littered down memory lane. A shout out to some fans at NYC. Nice job, Mike.
That's right. Hey, Justin, I was thinking our creative process. People need to know how this works.
Sorry that struck me.
Yeah, I know, right? It's a little. It's how we do things here at Grumpy Nostalgia, and we like to. If we do one movie, and for all its flaws, it was bad, but we try to tie it in. It was something good that came from it, like in Battlefield Earth, for instance. Forrest Whitaker, quite a good actor, and he didn't need to be in that movie, but he was, he did his role. It made me think, he was really good in Good Morning Vietnam. Man, I thought, you remember that song in that movie? It was What a Wonderful World.
Uh-huh.
It was one of the set pieces in that movie. I thought, you know what? There was another movie I saw that had that in there, and lo and behold, you came up with it. It was
wow.
This one here that you're listening to right now, 12
Look
Monkeys.
at that, yeah.
I know, isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Any more degrees of Kevin Bacon before?
That's all I can come up with right now. Yeah.
It's weird that you touched on the music because it's been several years since I've seen this, but I don't remember how emotional the music was. And I think the music choices they picked here were really interesting in terms of like empathy and sympathy and the maudlin nature of it. I was really super depressed after this movie, like in a good way,
Yeah, it's a grim tale, but it does have some hope behind it in a way. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, that's
it's told in a way. It's told in a hopeful way. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's explore that. Let's just kind of jump in. So this was released on December 27th, 1995. So Merry Christmas, midweek there. That was directed by Terry Gilliam, world-renowned director, famous for his role in the Monty Python series. Directed the Monty Python The Holy Grail, which is a staple for all nerds. Everybody has to see that. Directed Brazil, visual masterpiece Brazil. It's got a lot of tie-ins to this movie as well. Similarly themed The Fisher King was also his.
Yeah.
And the perennially haunting Time Bandits. We've talked about Time Bandits a few times. To this day, I can barely even look at the title without freaking out.
I know, right?
Very disturbing movie.
That's not a movie you should watch as a small child or
no.
A young adult even.
That should have like an NC-17 rating on it just for thematic elements alone. But it was written by a Frenchman named Chris Marker. He was a French filmmaker, never really gave a public interview in his entire life. This is based off a short film he did called Le Jetty. The Jetty comprised entirely of still images, but same kind of concept this was adapted from. It was written by a pair of screenwriters, David Peoples, Mike Hoover, remember, was one of the screenwriters for Blade Runner.
There you go.
Unforgiven, and his wife, Janet Peoples. And it had a budget of $29 million. Speaking of budgets, there's some interesting things about this movie in terms of budget and cast, and we'll talk about the cast and how it related to the budget. Why don't you kind of walk us through the principal players, Mike? We'll kind of talk about how the movie got made.
All right. Our lead, who we'll remember from The Fifth Element, which we did a while back, Bruce Willis.
Yeah.
Who has kind of become like a Nicolas Cage kind of actor in the last few years. He's put out so many movies. I know some of it's due to his medical condition, but my goodness, he's been in so many grade B, C, Z movies in the last few years. But you look at his filmography from the 90s and even, Die Hard and being in the TV show Moonlighting from then on, he was just a hot item. And he had some misses, Hudson Hawk, Last Boy Scout, Bonfire of the Vanities, Bruno, his foray into the music world.
Speaking of vanities,
there you go. That was a good project. Yeah. But then you think about movies he's been in that are just iconic, like this one and Die Hard and all the Die Hard movies.
Pulp Fiction,
yeah, and The Fifth Element. You think about his, kind of more of a serious turn in that was a non-action movie, and he's really good. I have no problems. It was perfect casting for him.
Yeah,
James Cole, our protagonist in this movie.
Sure.
Our Dr. Lady is played by Madeline Stowe.
Lady.
That's Dr. Lady Justin. And she's a beautiful, beautiful woman. I remember her in Last of the Mohicans and in one of my favorite Kevin Costner movies, Revenge. And
Yeah.
ironically, she ended up in a TV show on ABC a few years ago
Yeah.
called Revenge too.
Did she stay alive and did she get found?
Stay alive.
Just checking.
Yeah. Now she makes it through. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks to Daniel Day-Lewis there. And then she's the lady doctor that helps him out through the movie. Brad Pitt in this movie is basically a
I didn't notice.
crazy person. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I remember before this movie came out that he did his little Method Man acting thing again, where he kind of dives into a role, and he actually visited mental health facilities and watched videos of people with certain conditions and
Yeah.
learn how to do these nervous tics and all little hand gestures. That was all from him researching this stuff. It was, I mean, we've talked about this before when he did an Interview with a Vampire and Fight Club. He, at least in his early years, the dude really got into his roles. I mean, you got to admit, it was a little over the top in this movie, but it was really well done.
I think he hand painted a contact lens to give him that weird eye.
Yeah. I thought that was some kind of contact kind of effect on there. His dad is Christopher Plummer in this movie, who gets kind of a small role. Don't understand the Southern accent. I guess he was it was early rehearsal for Knives Out, maybe. I don't know. I know he's Canadian, so it's kind of odd, but rest in peace.
The foghorn leghorn.
It was that generic.
I do declare.
I do declare. My son is very okay and sober. David Morse is in this movie as one of Christopher Plummer's helpers, and he was in The Rock, and he's that side character. I kind of equate him with Noah Emmerich, if anybody knows who that is. But yeah, he's always in kind of these movies as that nice kind of quiet guy in the background of scenes, but he always kind of makes the scene really well.
Great actor.
Christopher Maloney shows up in here as a police officer.
Yeah.
Not Jim Halpert, but Jim Halperin. That name kind of threw me off for a minute. But yeah, Maloney's our an Oz graduate and Law and Order. It was a TV show. And
Cougar Icon, by the way.
Yeah, I've just saw something on that a couple of weeks ago, and it made me.
Well, it's encouraging for men of our age to know that guy can be a sex symbol, right? He should be.
I guess he would be. Either our age or maybe a little bit older. Is he? He's somewhere in his 50s.
Let's pretend he's older.
Okay, cool. I like that. And then Frank Gorshin. I want to round out the cast with the guy who played the Riddler in the 60s Batman Adam West show, and here he plays a psychiatrist. So kind of fitting. I love his. It's a small part, but it's kind of cool to see him on the screen.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's great, Mike. Thank you. I think what's really interesting here is that it's really kind of chock full of supporting oddball characters, very reminiscent of Terry Gilliam's movies.
Fisher King, or you think of the Baron von Munchausen movie. All those had those, like you say, the little oddballs.
Everybody's slightly off.
Yeah.
So thanks, Mike. Other things about this cast, Bruce Willis and most of the other cast all agreed to take significantly less money to work with, the chance to work with Terry Gilliam. All except for Brad Pitt, who wasn't getting any money anyway. People forget he was a young actor and he was just starting out. Yeah. This is before, I think he filmed this around the same time as Legend of the Fall and Interview with the Vampire, but he wasn't Brad Pitt yet. Mm-hmm. So, but what I thought here was the embryonic stage of his character actor niche. He could play the pretty boys like Tom Cruise his whole life. He played this guy that was just completely bonkers. And I guess we'll get into Mr. Goins.
He did. I think before this, he did that movie California.
Yeah.
Where he's a crazy killer. It's really well done.
Say what you want about this movie. What you do remember is Brad Pitt. That's for sure. Yeah. You talked about Bruce Willis. He was hired for the role. Jeff Bridges, Gilliam's original choice, because they had worked together on The Fisher King. And Bruce Willis auditioned for The Fisher King. He did not get it. So there's a little parallel there. Sylvester Stallone was the studio's choice.
Thank you.
As well as Nicolas Cage. So I can maybe see that. Robert De Niro turned it down.
He was in Brazil, wasn't he, De Niro? A really strange, why you were here kind of thing.
Yeah. Johnny Depp was considered for the Brad Pitt role, but Brad won the audition. You mentioned Frank Gorshin. Bart the Bear. A couple other shows we've done. Bart. This is our third Bart the Bear movie. Mike,
oh, really?
If I'm not mistaken. Yeah. He was the bear.
So, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Was he in The Shining as the bear?
Anything you say, Lloyd. Anything you say.
Was he in the bear costume?
All right, I'm going to move on.
Okay.
All right, the studio had some significant conflict with Terry Gilliam. He refused to take this project unless he had final cut because there are some legendary battles between the studio and Terry Gilliam regarding Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
Brazil's hard enough to understand.
Yeah.
As it is, but that's primarily the result of the studio getting their hands and kind of some creative control over it at the end, and it never really sat well to Gilliam. So he said he only wanted a final cut in order to do this movie, and he got it. That final cut was showed to a test screening audience and was not enjoyed at all. But an interesting stick to their guns attitude, the studio said, you know what, we're going to trust Terry Gilliam. He's a significant filmmaker. We're not going to make any changes. We're just going to roll the dice and trust his vision, and it kind of worked out. There's a significant steampunk influence in this movie. Did you notice that, Mike?
Yeah, it did. That's the future images, I guess, from whatever year it's supposed to be. Is it 2030?
It's implied that it's set in 2035. It's not necessarily addressed, but the 2035. Okay. It's never really said in the film, but if you do the math, that's kind of where it kind of comes out. So,
okay.
Yeah. But yeah, interesting take on future. So we talked about that on our last episode. Check it out, guys. Check out our last episode. You'll enjoy it. All right, so we're talking way back in 1995. So there's a couple of movies. Of course, it was the holiday season. So there's the competing movies for December that year were. Mike, I brought this up for you. And Father of the Bride 2.
Yes.
We started our holiday season with that romp. I know it's
thank you, Steve Martin.
You had Babe. That'll Do Pig. That was very well received. He had the Val Kilmer, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino epic Heat.
Yes.
Yeah, which is probably a movie that's in our purview. We need to look at that someday. We had the original Jumanji.
Okay.
Not to be confused with the newer Jumanji, which has 3 of my least favorite people on earth and one of my most favorite. So Karen Gillan is in there. She's my favorite. But you had The Rock, Kevin Hart, and Jack Black. Well, what movie can we make that will kill Justin from grumpy nostalgia?
I
know.
I got something I just read this morning. This is hot off the press, Justin.
Yeah.
They're remaking Time Bandits into a TV series on Apple TV. So there you go.
That's interesting. I don't know how I feel about that. I think a series is neater.
Right. I don't know how many episodes, but yeah, it's supposed to be a full season of Time Bandits.
All right. Well, speaking of that, this is off topic, but I was privy to some information a couple of days ago that just made me vomit. Our last episode was Princess Bride, and we talked about extensively how it shouldn't be remade, how it could not be remade. It's being remade, Mike.
Shocking! Wow! Wait, hold on. I just fell on the floor. Hold on.
Yeah, all right. I think a Jonas brother is involved, or his wife. Yeah. Okay. So there you go.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, sacrilege never ceases in Hollywood. All right, so and then had Cutthroat Island came out a couple of weeks after, so that's a movie.
That one should be all jokes aside, we talked about Battlefield Earth being remade.
Yeah,
some of these stinkeroos like that need to be retried. I think Battlefield Earth should be. I think Cutthroat Island
conceptually great. This execution is all wrong. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. On TV was pretty much everything else in the 90s. ER, Seinfeld, Friends, Caroline in the City. That was a must-see Thursday. So that's all that was. The music scene was pretty fun. It was Mariah Carey featuring Boyz II Men with the song One Sweet Day. Yeah. We had Hootie and the Blowfish with the song Time.
Hey.
University of South Carolina, guys.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And he had Joan Osborne was singing about one of us. What if God was one of us?
There's a stranger on a bus. Yeah.
I'm a much bigger proponent of Dr. Evil's version of this song.
What if God was one of us? Just a slug like one of us. Blue, 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 blue. Yeah, blah, blee, blee, blee.
Much more effectively in my book, anyway.
I wrote that.
On the rock scene, it was a little bit better. We had the Smashing Pumpkins had 2 songs in the top 40 rock chart in 1979 and Bullet with Butterfly Wings. Other bands populating the rock charts at the same week was Pearl Jam, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Green Day, Silverchair, Alice in Chains, Collective Soul, and every other grunge band that was available. And you had the Brit Boys, you had Wonderwall by Oasis in there too. So that's when the brothers were still together and cranking out great Beatles rip-off music. But
and again, if you just heard our Battlefield Earth podcast, Justin went through the songs from 2000. Look how much better it was just 5 years earlier. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's
I mean, in our opinion, of course.
yeah. Very precipitous cliff. Everything fell off. All right, some other things going on in 1995 that were kind of loosely affiliated with pop culture. Newsweek's Clifford Stoll reporter published an article boldly claiming the internet was not going to make it, confidently saying that no online database will ever replace your daily newspaper. What I think is funny about that story is that Newsweek has owned that, and as a mea culpa, they still have this article on their webpage.
Oh my gosh.
They've kept it up there every day since it's been posted as kind of proof that he made a bad call. But you can check this.
Is Clifford selling pencils on the street corner somewhere?
No, but I love the fact that they kept it on there. You can click that page and you can read that article to this day. That's just funny. It was released around the Christmas season. Everybody's Christmas hot list was the Sony PlayStation came out that year.
Oh, wow.
The Sega Saturn. And Nintendo released the Virtual Boy. Not to be confused with Nuclear Boy. Or Nuclear Man from Superman
Nuclear
4.
Man, come on.
We lost a couple of legends that year. Jerry Garcia famously passed away. I had a chance to go see The Grateful Dead at Soldier Field in 1995, and I turned it down, and it ended up he died 2 days later. So
Oh my word.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and Selena, Tejano Music Selena legend was killed by the president of her fan club. That's not creepy at all. The other thing about 1995, and I again, this is a story just for you, Mike. Casper, the ghost, became the first fully CGI rendered main character in a movie.
Nice.
All apologies to Jar Jar. He usually gets that credit, but it was actually Casper the ghost.
Oh,
With the very young and
Bill
charming
Pullman.
Christina Ricci. Yeah. Bill Pullman,
yeah.
yeah. So we kind of
Too
set
bad.
the stage. We're in, mid-90s. 20th century was coming to a grind, and grunge was ramping up, and we were getting ready to go into a new century. And
Steampunk.
Yeah. And this movie kind of captured some of that fear of, the unknown and going into the future. And so I guess we should just go ahead and get started. So, Mike, if you're ready,
Let's do it.
hit the button. So our movie kind of opens up with this kind of a black screen, and there's some narration on there. It says 5 billion people will die in 1997, and man goes underground. And it's a quote from a paranoid schizophrenic, but we'll get to that actual identity here in a little bit. We kind of cut to prisoner Bruce Willis, plays the character named James Cole. He's essentially getting voluntold by his captors to go on a mission up on the ground. Man has been forced to live underground as an effect to the viral infection that's taken over the planet. And so as a result of this, they send occasional volunteers to go up to collect specimens, and he draws the short straw and kind of goes up there, and they kind of show him looking through a very post-apocalyptic New York.
Philadelphia.
Was it Philly? Okay.
Yeah, City Hall in Philadelphia.
Okay. What I liked here was the contrast between how this movie addressed a post-apocalyptic world versus Battlefield Earth. Battlefield Earth still had shiny red cars and Christmas trees and shopping malls, and after 1,000 years, and this really showed what the effect of man's influence on architecture and the environment would be after 30 years in the city, and it was very gruesome. As he comes back, he collects various bugs and spiders and things like that for a collective band of very weird scientists, and we'll get to them here in a minute. They're praising his work, and they're doing the de-scrub. You see a lot of Bruce Willis's butt here. He gets sprayed down and hosed down a lot. It's a little too much. Yeah. But as he's like doing his debriefing, there's this collective panel of scientists that typical Terry Gilliam fashion are oddly appearance and weird accoutrement and weird sunglasses and very harsh makeup. And they say they have a special assignment for him, and they just kind of like leave it there. And then so we kind of jump, I guess, back to 1990, where the effervescent Madeline Stowe is getting called into to the jail cell to help to consult this patient they brought in, and she comes in to see a tranquilized Bruce Willis chained to the middle of the floor. He thinks he's in 1996, and she's trying to assess, if he's insane or just on drugs and all that kind of thing. But you can see an element here that Bruce Willis really portrays a believable guy here. You don't, even to the unaffiliated doctors, she senses a sense of truth in his demeanor, at least. But of course, she's sentenced him to the mental institution, and that's where Bruce meets up with Brad Pitt playing the character Jeffrey Goins.
Yeah, and did you notice they waited until they got actually into the mental institution to start doing Dutch angles?
I did. There's a lot of there's a lot of handheld stuff here too that just made that mental
It just,
institution.
yeah,
Really creepy.
unsettled.
Yeah, unsettling. Yeah. But Brad Pitt plays this eccentric Jeffrey Goins, who's kind of he's got some mental problems, but he kind of runs the asylum, and he's a big bully, and he's
He's
Brad Pitt talking.
a crazy communist.
He is, but a fantastic role by Brad Pitt here. He
Yeah.
could have gone off the deep end here, but he kept it dialed in just enough, I think, to just really depict just a really lovable yet scary and horrible character here.
Yeah.
The first thing I noticed here, there's no on-screen depiction of the mechanism for time travel. I think that was kind of genius.
Yeah,
you know?
it is.
Yeah,
He just gets thrown into a tube or like
Yeah.
put in like some kind of sent into a light void, and you're like, okay, there he goes.
Yeah, so like a movie like Demolition Man would show you like all the buttons being pushed and all the things, the machine working and all that kind of thing, and all much exposition. But the ambiguity of how they come to manage time travel is just, I didn't appreciate it the first time, but I'm like, okay, this makes much more sense, leaving that kind of unanswered. So he's stuck in this mental institution. He's trying to figure ways out, and Brad Pitt's kind of taking advantage of him to just to have something to play with. And there's a little exposition here where he sits in front of the medical board, and it explains the situation where he's been sent from the future to go back to try to take out people that released this virus in 1990, but it turns out he gets sent to the wrong year. And that's not a good thing. So again, because the ambiguity, he just kind of vanishes. He breaks out of the institution and just kind of vanishes. And he kind of comes back in World War One era. That doesn't work. So they haven't perfected the whole concept of time travel, which I think adds an element of danger and things like that. I really appreciated the way they handled that. So he ultimately ends up going to like 1996, where he kind of comes across Madeline Stowe again. She's giving a lecture about the Cassandra complex, which I thought was an interesting parallel. Yeah, essentially kind of kidnaps her. Before he does that, though, she's doing a book signing at the end of her lecture, and David Morse kind of comes up to get his book signed, and they don't introduce who he is or what he's about, but you get the feeling that there's something creepy about this guy.
He's very creepy, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll kind of get to him a little bit later. But essentially the movie is, he kind of kidnaps Madeline and tries to convince her that, his mission is real. And of course, she's the practical person. She has to be as the physician, as the doctor, the psychiatrist, but she starts to make a case for it. For example, he knows there's a news story really relevant at the time about a kid falling down a well. And, because Bruce was alive then, he knew that story. He says, well, that kid's just, it's a hoax. And it turns out to be true. He spends the majority of the second act limping, and she says, what's wrong with your leg? He goes, well, I got shot. And of course, she starts to have feelings for him, just empathy, if nothing else. And she pulls him off the side of the road and does a patch up and realizes that the bullet that came out of his leg was from World War One. That really kind of seals the deal for her. But she kind of gets converted over. And then ends up, he's trying to trace the origin of the Army of the 12 Monkeys. That's the information that the people of the future have about how this thing got launched. So you search for this group of terrorists is really the main event of the movie. So they have little luck. And then Cole actually meets up with Brad Pitt a few years later after he's been released from the institution. It turns out Brad Pitt's father is a famous virologist played by Christopher Plummer. And this is where things start to get, kind of put together. He tries to understand what the issue is there, and he realizes that the 12 Monkeys are nothing, just more of a diversion.
Environmental, they're like an environmental guerrilla group.
Yeah. So after he finds out this information, he gets sucked back again to the future group. He feels like he's failed because he never found the source of the virus, but this kind of gave them all this kind of information about, well, now they know where not to look, kind of thing. This is where the third act begins. And this is where Cole, played by Bruce Willis, this is where his character really kind of goes through a metamorphosis. You just feel the empathy and the despair of him. And he's just so tired and worn out that he volunteers to go back because he wants to stay there, because he's above ground and he loves the air and he just misses that life. And he actually, out of despair, he gives up and concedes that he is mentally ill just to stay in that era, which I thought was just a really kind of heart-wrenching thing, to the point where he's trying to convince Madeline Stowe that he is crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like all three of his trips back in time, he's a totally different character. The first time he goes back, he legitimately is like, slightly insane and angry and almost violent. And in the second stage, when he returns in 96, he's lucid and almost knows what his mission is. And he's able to be relaxed and tell her what to do. And then in the third one, he's resigned to the fate. It's almost like he knows what his fate is. And by the third time, I mean, he's like, you know what? I know what I want. This is what I want. And I know I'm crazy. You're right.
Right.
But and it's funny because her character goes to the exact same arc and backwards. And
Yeah.
by the third stage, she's like, no, you're not crazy. You're right. This is what we need to do. And he's like, no, this is dumb. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, he like degrades and she accelerates. Like they kind of,
Right.
she picks up the mantle in the third act and says, "Well, okay, well, I'm going to save the future now."
Yeah.
And his psychological breakdown is really like the driving part of the movie. And the thing that I just really didn't notice the first time I was watching through, I was like, "My God, you just feel for this guy. He's just gone through so much." And it's reinforced by he keeps having this dream. The very first scene in the movie is a young boy's eyes, and he's looking at a David Crosby like guy in a Hawaiian shirt running through an airport getting shot. And he's chased by this blonde woman. He keeps having this recurring dream throughout the movie, and that dream keeps pounding on him. And there's some relevance there. We'll get to it here at the end. So they decide that they're going to go on the lam and just kind of, he's going to finally take him to go see the ocean while they try to figure out the rest of the clues to how this virus gets released. And what they do is essentially reconstruct the dream that he's been having. She dyes her hair blonde. She gets some spirit gum and puts a mustache on him, gives him a wig, and gives him this Hawaiian shirt. And they're going to the airport. And at the check-in, this is pre 9/11, so the check-in things are much more lax. At the check-in line, she sees the David Morse character she saw from the book signing earlier, talking about the end of mankind and eliminating man to save the earth. And she sees him carrying essentially hazardous materials, and she pieces together that he's the guy that's going to release the virus. This is where Bruce kind of runs after him and gets shot, and it kind of reconstructs the dream he's been having. Where the story kind of bookends is that because they had given the people from the future enough information, they had enough people to kind of safeguard this. So even though he gets killed and doesn't actually take out David Morse with all the virus, he had plane flights to all across the world. And when he sits down in the plane, he sits next to one of the future doctors, the astrophysicist, the lady, and you can tell that she's come back from the future to finish the job. One of the great lines, she goes, she said, what her name is. She goes, "I'm in insurance."
Yeah.
And he claimed that she's, she's going to take him out, and it kind of put this, yeah,
and that's we'll get to that in a minute as far as what that ending means.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal ending.
Yeah.
It's a Terry Gilliam trade, but it kind of bookends with the young boy, which we find out is a young James Cole. As a child, he sees this happen. And the story kind of bookends where the last image we see his eyes staring, into the camera, and then we kind of fade to black. And then we go to the credits. It's got that crazy like harpsichord music that just gets creepy, So, but yeah, that's visually just an amazing ending.
Yeah, it's just ambiguous enough to have you walking out of the theater going, "Wow, so did he save mankind, or is he just part of the the machinery to make sure that like they get their sample of pure viral material, which is what they're trying to get the whole time from these animal samples."
Yeah.
And they can't seem to get the right code from the virus that they're collecting. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Even though there wasn't some, dramatic high speed chase or shootout at the end, I found myself at the end of it, when the credits start rolling, I had this huge audible gasp. Like I'd been holding my breath. It was just, it's the way they did the ending, just this psychological twist. And, when she sits in the plane and shakes David Morse's hands, it's like, how clever, how very ingenious,
right.
Yes, but it was exhausting.
I know, right?
The last act of this movie are just, very well crafted, very great story. Just very clever. So how clever was it? Let's talk about awards and accolades. So it did not translate to a huge box office. It had a midweek release, so the box office for the first weekend was only $184,000. It did end up doing $57 million domestically, however, and then worldwide it jumped up to $168 million. So
wow, that's good.
A big hit. Several awards and nominations, among them Oscar nominations for costume design. They lost the movie restoration. Brad Pitt got an Oscar nomination for his supporting role, but he lost that to Kevin Spacey in Usual Suspects. So.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah, but don't feel bad for Brad. He won a Golden Globe that year for the same role. He won a Blockbuster Award for the same role.
I'm sure he still has that in his cabinet at home.
Yeah. Mike, it's time to go back to MTV.
Oh, good.
The MTV Movie Awards nominated him for Best Male Performance, but he lost to Jim Carrey for his poignant role in Ace Ventura.
Oh, Ace Ventura. Oh, okay. Wow.
But don't feel too bad for Brad. He didn't win Most Desirable Male that year. So there you go. Great category on TV.
Yeah, they showed his butt in the movie too. So
That's
maybe
right.
that
Yeah,
helped.
a lot of butt. Speaking of great categories from MTV, this is famously the year that MTV had a category for best sandwich in a movie. Mike,
I can't even.
your stunned
I'm
silence
done.
says enough.
I'm stumped on this one. I can't
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah, it was the ham and cheese sandwich from the movie Smoke, if anybody cares. But
Oh my gosh.
that's how irreverent and avant-garde MTV was. But there you go. The legacy of this movie is just that. It's an homage to steampunk. It's a precursor for a lot of post-apocalyptic movies. Visual style of Terry Gilliam, to this day is unparalleled, and this movie is just kind of a prime example of how great it was. So there you go. A great movie all in all. So let's talk about it on a personal level, Mike. Let's put it through our grumpy meter. Maybe talk about your feelings, your ratings on the first time you saw it way back when, and then your feelings after your most recent watch.
Yeah, I mean, I like when I first saw it, it's one of those, I love time travel movies and just the idea of the first thing you want to do after you watch it's like, okay, could that happen? Or obviously time travel is still a concept, but there's a universe in a movie which it can exist and it can function if it's done correctly. This is one of those movies that works out really well. Even the fact they are able to track him through his teeth, which I thought was very clever. It's weird. This is the third time I've seen it, which it's not a lot, but the first two times I'm watching an obvious time travel movie, and I'm no doubt about it. This time I'm watching it, and I'm seeing more of I'm not gonna say a dream scenario, but there are things that happen in this movie that were just odd to me. I know him seeing the zoo animals in 2035 still walking around outside.
Yep.
Like a lion and a bear, and
no penguins with rockets.
Right. No penguins. Oh, thank you. Oh Lord.
Sorry.
No Tim Burton. But yeah, it was weird to think that, okay, so the animals are released in 96. Are lions still around Philadelphia? 40 years later, just a question. But it made me think, okay, is that a mental image? The Madeline Stowe character, the doctor, she mentioned seeing him before. And is it because she saw him this is in 1990. She says that she's saying this. So this is before the airport incident. How is she having a precognitive vision of him? It's just that kind of thing was really bizarre to me, and it made me think, okay, maybe they're trying to explain it's some kind of time causality loop or something. I don't know. It's one of those I should really just relax kind of moments.
Repeat to yourself, it's just the show. I should really just relax.
It's like, no, okay.
There's
just, I don't know did you see the TV show when they had the TV show on Sci-Fi?
I did. I did. Yeah,
years ago.
I think I missed the last season, but yeah.
The one thing they did differently, which I question when I watch this movie now because of hindsight, was in that show, he actually goes back to contact Dr. Jones as her younger self.
Yeah.
And that's one of his main goals, is to find one of these scientists, say, hey, you need to get this a year from now because this is going to get released. But these scientists he's talking to in 12 Monkeys in 2035 in the movie don't have him do that, which I think is interesting because they're obviously older than him. They would have been in teenage or even college age at the time. They would have been cognizant enough to know, hey, come see me, Dr. Jones. I was living here at the time.
Yeah.
It's just interesting they didn't do that. I know that's another nitpick. But,
that's a caveat of any time travel movie. You can argue these things. You can go down the vortex.
I just thought it was interesting that the TV show kind of took that. I don't know if it was considered a flaw or something, but took that. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, no, here's what happens in our show.
Right.
He actually does go back to the younger doctor and tell her, you need to do this. But yeah, just the whole way that time works and this is interesting. And like you say, where she finally sees, she's sitting next to David Morse at the end. She's like, I'm in insurance. You don't know. It just takes off. The plane takes off. You don't know if she's going to allow him to spread the disease and have life as it is, and just take one of his samples out of his case when he's not looking, and and she could take that back. I don't know how that works. I don't know if they could bring an object back through their time portal. And it's kind of obviously Bruce Willis brought a bullet back inside of him. So it must be possible to bring back things in the past. So it kind of left that ambiguous, which I kind of like in a way.
Yeah, it did. It worked.
He's still it's almost like Bruce Willis's character in the movie was used as like I said, probably a little earlier, was he just seemed like a cog in the machine. They needed him to do this task.
Yeah.
And that's why they were following him, so they could know exactly who they were going to. And his fate was already decided. Like, they knew he was going to die. And that's why he didn't have a gun when he went to the airport. They have to use one of their soldiers from the future to come and hand him the gun and say, here.
Right.
You know, so that they could have left him alone. And it was just funny how they purposely set him up for that loop of just, you know, his fate was already sealed. And interesting how they did that. And this movie's not a very good travelogue of Philadelphia, by the
way. Not pre-apocalyptic.
Oh,
anyway.
And Easter eggs galore. I know you appreciate the fact they were actually watching the Marx Brothers movie Monkey Business.
Monkey Business, yeah.
They always kept talking about going to the Keys.
Yeah.
The reference to Vertigo was crazy because, you know, in that movie, it's a doctor trying to help someone who's crazy in the movie. It's just really clever little Easter eggs like that. I thought were, you know, interesting.
Very strategically, very nicely handpicked that kind of support the whole narrative of the story. So, yeah.
Yep.
All right, Mike. So it's my turn now. Thank you. I think the first time I saw it, I really just saw it as a time travel movie and kind of like an action adventure. And I enjoyed it, probably 4 out of 5. And I watched it. I think this is probably like you, probably my 3rd or 4th time. But I have not seen this movie in like at least a decade. When I watched it last night on the big screen, like you're supposed to for once, I just was overcome by emotion for some reason. The maudlin theme of it to me was like almost like a stream of consciousness nightmare rescue movie.
Yeah.
You know, the time travel element was the plot device, not really the point of it, you know?
Right. And it's like the scientists are almost unnecessarily mean to him, especially after he goes back to 1990 and comes back and they're, you know, like almost interrogating him. It's like, you were taken to a mental asylum. You know, it's like they were like shocked that a guy that goes back in time 40 years and says, hey, I'm from the future. And he doesn't get shipped off to a mental. I mean, they were like almost antagonistic against him. You know, it was kind of funny.
Yeah, but I guess I played to the more personal parts of it with the individual characters and their you know, psychological breakdowns and the fears and all that dread they were experiencing. It's really hit me for some reason. I can't explain why.
Yeah.
I think having seen Brazil after, I hadn't seen Brazil prior to my first watch back in '97. Having seen it after, I started to see some parallels there and kind of understand, you know, this dystopian future element, and I kind of put those pieces together. I really appreciated it.
Brazil's like a comedic 1984. It just
It's almost a companion piece of this movie. Kind of tangent sequels, maybe. We talked, I think, way back on our 4th show, we talked about how aggravating he is that Brad Pitt is a good actor and how hard it is to say that out loud. But you can see, like I said earlier on, just the embryonic stages of his character development, how great he was, you know, with his weird haircuts and his horrible mustache and ponytail later on, and the prolific use of his middle finger. That middle finger was either pointing at somebody or in his mouth the entire movie, which I just thought was a ridiculous trait. And I know he probably saw that from right. He probably picked that up, but I think I don't go up or down. I still have the same sense of appreciation, maybe just from a different side of it. But just really enjoyed this movie. It was a great watch, and really enjoyed kind of looking back at it. So we talked about my back and forth was this a time travel movie or something else? But at the end of the day, it is essentially a time travel movie, whether it's the theme of the movie or just a plot device. And that got us here at Grumpy Nostalgia talking about a very famous trope in movies, time travel. So although it's never displayed exactly what the mechanism is for time travel, that is a major point in this movie. So we thought it would be funny for this week's episode of You Just Made the List, Pal. So if we had the ability to use a time machine today, like the one portrayed in this movie, what movies would we go back and rescue if we had the opportunity? So very clever, right, Mike?
That's pretty good.
So, Mike, why don't you kick us off? Let's try to do 3 or so, and maybe some honorable mentions. But you're in a time machine. The opportunity to go back and save a movie.
Is it a hot tub time machine, or is it just a regular time machine?
That's personal preference. Up to you, pal. Okay. Let's hear your first pick.
All right, this one's. I'm gonna work small and get bigger as I go for my 3 here.
Okay.
First, I want to go with the premise that there's not another Harrison Ford franchise or flick that can be redone by him at this point. Because if there is, I would go back in time and have him die in whatever movie that would be. So it couldn't be a sequel wise, but by an 80-year-old Harrison Ford. Thanks. The man just needs to say no.
No Dial of Destiny for you, Mike.
Golly. But okay, my first one is a movie we did a few podcasts ago. I think we did it with Molly. It was Predator 2.
Okay.
This is a simple recasting. Danny Glover, great actor, great side character in a lot of movies. You know, he's getting too old for this kind of stuff.
Yeah. He was 41 when he said that, by the way. Just
right. I know, right? He's like John Carradine, or he's always like, or he's always old. You know, it's like, come on, he's young at one point.
10 years younger than us, by the way.
I know, but it wasn't a very dynamic performance. You know, I would rather have seen Will Smith at that time, or maybe Will Smith was probably too young. He was still in Fresh Prince, but maybe a Denzel Washington. It's somebody who had a little more youth and vigor, maybe a little bit more charisma.
Yeah,
I think that's what that movie was lacking. And it's just one of those, I rethought about it after we did our podcast. I was like, that Danny Glover really wasn't. He was a grizzled cop for sure, but that movie needed some young blood in it that needed to get you more into the movie. And that's probably why we didn't see a Predator 3 for 20 years afterwards. But anyway, that's my first. It's a simple casting change.
Yeah, or they could have done like we discussed in the podcast. They could have gave him the $350,000 he wanted and got Arnold. Or that.
Or that.
All right, that's a good one, Mike. I'm not even going to talk about the Tamale steamer tragedy in that movie, but
those Jamaicans.
My first pick is a pretty easy one. Not much of a revelation here. I would go back for the 1990 release of The Phantom Menace. I would convince George Lucas to rethink Jake Lloyd, but not just kid actor. I would encourage him to rethink where we pick up what Anakin's story. I mean, do we really need to know what a 7-year-old Darth Vader was? I mean,
that'll do the trick.
I mean, you can
spinning.
Yeah, you can make the argument that the entire episode of Phantom Menace could be told in flashback, and maybe he started with Attack of the Clones as a gothy angst teenager, Anakin Skywalker, Hayden Christensen. But I think that might have played a little bit better. But again, that's Star Wars fan fiction, and doesn't carry a whole lot of weight. But as personal preference, I would say that.
Would you tap on Lucas's shoulder and say, "Hey, that Jar Jar Binks guy, you really want to do that? You sure? Are you sure about
it?" Maybe in little bits in flashback. Hey, what was that? What was that Jar Jar thing he was talking about? We should need more of him. Yeah.
Excuse me.
So that's my take.
Oh, I'm so glad you went into the world of Star Wars, because my next pick,
Sacred Cows,
is a certain movie that came out in 2017 called The Last Jedi.
Okay.
A reviled movie at this point. It launched probably 1,000 YouTube channels of people who just hated it. And if you distill it down, it probably is the director Rian Johnson and his vision of how The Force Awakens should go to the next movie.
Yeah.
There's no reason. And again, let's go up the chain of command again. Let's go to Kathleen Kennedy. I don't know how she still has a job, but her decision to have a different director do the second movie in that the trilogy, and have Rian Johnson replace J.J. Abrams, which is probably agreed on by Abrams, but for Abrams to come in and have to do the third movie, we're working with that second movie. It turned into a mess after what I think was kind of a promising opening with The Force Awakens. It obviously did well. The budget was a pretty well done movie. I would like to have seen what Abrams wanted to do with some of those plot lines, like Snoke and some other things that were just kind of wiped away with one swipe of Rian Johnson's hand.
Yeah,
and totally, this is Monday morning quarterbacking, but that's what I would have done. I would have had Abrams do all 3 movies and kept it consistent.
Yep, that's. Can't really argue there. I'm not as much as a hater on The Last Jedi as most people, but I will concede that there's a whole plot story where Finn and Rose go on this mission that doesn't go anywhere or do anything, and that's like 30 minutes of screen time in this. But so there you go.
And it's not that what was the last one called? I'm sorry, I forgot already. But the one
Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, the Rise of Skywalker had the possibility of being a better movie if but it was already by the time it was a
damage
mess.
damage control.
It was it was, and the movie was damaged goods. So I mean, people had already tuned out. So there you go.
Right. Okay, that's a good one. All right, my next pick is we've talked about this before, but I'm just going to bring it up again. I would talk to Francis Ford Coppola about casting Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker in Bram Stoker's Dracula.
One. Yes.
Jonathan Harker is a pivotal character in this narrative of Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, the first 5 or 6 chapters are about his encounter with, he's the exposition, he's the tool, and you kind of go through his mindset through his eyes to see what Dracula is. And he has his own little story and a little story arc that are perilous, but Keanu couldn't get the accent right. It's not his, he regrets having taken this role as well, but they had to plug in the teen beat element to get that demographic, I'm sure. But it just took me right out of the movie, because to see him and to, let's be honest, Winona Ryder, they could not pull off the dialogue in this whatsoever. Right. And there's a scene, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but there's a scene where inexplicably his hair is completely gray.
Oh yeah.
It's not even a passage of time. He just has gray hair for 2 scenes. There's all kinds of stuff wrong with that movie, and again, we'll have to talk about this one as well, Mike. But
I think that one has to be a later episode for sure.
Yeah, a movie I wanted to like so badly, and it was just so bad. So I think it wasn't Keanu's fault that the movie was bad, but he didn't help it anyway. So there you go.
For sure.
Get Keanu Reeves out of that movie. That's my next one. Cast anybody.
anyone, please.
Yeah.
All right. Well, is it time for me to go again?
Yeah, it's your turn.
I got a stack as high as an elephant's leg here of some honorable mentions.
Okay, I wrote a lot too, so let's.
And these are softballs. They're just like Grease 2. Why? I mean, seriously, the same director did it too. I can't blame it on a different director this time. It was the same lady. And why did she agree to do? I know, money.
Michelle Pfeiffer, though.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why did she do it, Michelle?
Exactly.
Why?
Michelle.
Blues Brothers 2000. Why? It's not a desecration of John Belushi's memory at all, but it's one of those. Dan Aykroyd. I mean, goes out to you. Why? I mean, you should have just ended it right there. 1981, just Blues Brothers. Leave it. Go.
Audience, you can't see me, but my head is in my hands.
And you talk about a movie that needed Keanu Reeves. That would be Speed 2.
Utah, give me 2.
Yep.
As soon as they thought of the idea, as soon as the idea percolated in their brains to have one of the major actresses, Sandra Bullock, in there, but not have the guy she ends up with in the first movie? No. Dumb. Stupid. Why? Again, another movie that didn't have any of the major characters in it and replaced iconic characters. Caddyshack 2. Why? Anyway, that's enough of sequels. Why was Russell Crowe in Les Miserables? That was
Hey, that's one of mine. Okay, we're on the same page.
Now everybody else in that movie has some acting chops. It's a Broadway background to him, and some good singing voices. His just whole appearance in there it was off-putting. He makes a good French cop though. And then my last honorable mention is the Twilight Zone movie. A movie that again is kind of off-putting, like a Terry Gilliam movie, but the reason it's off-putting is because there's 4 different directors. For me, it was a case of too many cooks. I wish maybe George Miller did all of them, or Steven Spielberg did all of them, or Joe Dante. Obviously John Landis had a bit of an issue, but it just needed one director to do those 4, and it might have been better received. I don't know. That's again, it's going back in time. There you go. But Justin, ultimately, I want to go back in time and I want to kill Adolf Hitler. I'm so tired of movies where those guys from the mid-century from Germany are always the villain. There's it's almost lazy plot writing at this point. They're always inserted as the bad guys. It's too easy a target, and I'm good. Listen, I want to punch one of those guys as much as anybody else, but there's a lot. There's a big world out there. We have a long history. There's
all kinds of jerks out there, guys.
Yes. You can find more. They're out there. So maybe look a little harder.
You used to use Russians, and then it got a little un-PC to do that.
Exactly.
So I agree with you. The Nazis are a safe villain for everybody. So therefore,
Right.
everything's Nazis. Even like modern things are Nazis. So
Yeah, just oh,
people hate everything. Go after that. Well, I think that the issue is there's no fear of retribution with Nazis. You know,
right. It is.
who's gonna defend a Nazi?
It's an easy target, and
Yeah.
in a way, I can't blame them. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't sympathize with those characters, but
Yeah.
try a little harder.
Yeah, just think the evolution of film history. Indians used to be the bad guys.
Yeah.
Try to do that now. You know, again, because of the time. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that our perspectives have changed. So
think how many movies Mel Gibson's been in where he's made the English the bad guys. You know.
Yeah, they're conquerors. You know, they
Yeah.
raping and pillaging. You know,
There you go.
India and Sri Lanka and all these places. So yeah, but people can't take the historical context and keep it where it is. They've got to just blow it up to be, you know, wow, we're getting grumpy. All right, Mike. So those are good. So I appreciate that. My third and final pick is a repeat, but so let me just throw out a few honorable mentions too, in the spirit of you, Mike. Kevin Costner, one of your favorites, as Robin Hood.
Dang, that's a guess.
Probably could have rethought that casting. He did say like 3 or 4 lines with an accent though. That he tried, but you know, not so much. We talk about.
I was trying to think if he had as good as English accent as Travolta was trying to do in Battlefield Earth.
I think Keanu Reeves
was
Keanu Reeves' dialect coach. We talk about classic Universal monsters with Dracula. I'm going to go one better. I'm going to go with Frankenstein, directed by Kenneth Branagh, where he decided to cast the minuscule Robert De Niro as the hulking giant Frankenstein's monster. Horrible movie. All I remember about that movie is Kenneth Branagh spun the camera around all the time. That these like circling shots around, spinning around. Horrible movie, and a lot of full frontal nudity, which I'm not from Robert De Niro, which I'm not really, you know.
No. I saw enough of him in Cape Fear.
The only way to invoke any terror out of that movie, for me at least. But my ultimate pick here is going to be a callback. I'm going to talk about producers and director of the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And I would have them reconsider that part of the script where they go into the Wonkatania. The tunnel.
Yeah.
Again, we talked about this decades ago, guys, in our Poltergeist episode. If you're curious, you can go back and listen to this original content. But it's a wonderful child movie with a kind of a morality tale and just wonderful images and candy and whimsy. And Gene Wilder gets interrupted for about, 5-6 minutes of complete horror and terror. And
you get to see a chicken get his head cut off.
Yeah, and worms crawling in people's mouths, and the lovable Willy Wonka screaming at the top of his lungs.
The song he sings is it's like Brad Pitt and 12 Monkeys.
Hey kids, I dare you go to sleep tonight.
So you get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
But again, as lovely and as wonderful as that movie is, that scene sticks with everybody, you know, years and years later. I just needlessly so. So, all right, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. So, if you want to catch anything about me and Mike's show, you can catch us out on our Instagram page at Grumpy Nostalgia. And if you want to send us an email outlining in great detail how inaccurate our observations are, we'd love to hear from you on that. You can reach out to us at nostalgiagrumps@gmail.com. So, Mike, that's going to kind of wrap it up for this week. This was a fun one. I think it's time to get out of here. So, anything you want to say before we head out, Mike?
Einstein was a fruitcake.
I am insane, and you are my insanity. So, for Mike James, this is Justin, and we will see you again next time.
No, dumb, stupid. Why? Who?